Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Office Hours. This is where we answer your tech questions 7 days a week. It's time to get right to it. Jesse, what do we have in the queue for this morning?
It's actually me, Mike Edwards, in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everyone. With Apple just purchasing Pixelmator, what does this mean for editing suites moving forward?
Sorry about that. Alexander, let's go to Nigel Dessau. Nigel?
So I don't think any of us really know what any of this means yet. It's too early. I think the ink is probably dry or still drying on the contracts. I don't know whether there's what the public or private nature of Pixelmator Pro or Pixelmator was and who they're going to get approvals from. But I think, let's deal with photo apps. I think there's one of three options. They could completely integrate it into the photos. It doesn't exist on iOS yet, so they could move it to iOS. They could make it as a separate downloadable Pro product like they did with the classical music stuff, or they could, and probably more interestingly, think about what they're going to do since they took Aperture away from us. So I was a huge Aperture user. I was very sad when Aperture disappeared. So I would think the third option would be, to do another product in the category of Final Cut Pro and all the other products, the professional products. What this means to editing suites is unclear as well. I mean, I doubt they'll integrate it into Final Cut Pro, but there's times when we all need to go to a photo editor, and maybe this is an alternative.
Jesse Kester.
Pixelmator does exist in the iOS space. It's $9.99 for a perpetual license, and I'm just hoping that Apple understands that Pixelmator users are using it because it is a lifetime license.
Alex?
Yeah, I think it'd be really interesting to see if Pixelmator became another office office tool, like one of the tools that goes along with Keynote and everything else. I mean, being able to generate content, I think, is pretty interesting, and I think that it is. We were always surprised. There was always this rumor that floated around that we don't have any proof for, that Apple had that they had a Photoshop killer somewhere floating around, and I think we gave up on that. But we think there was a time when Adobe took an enormous amount of time to do an update, and it really was hard for Apple to wait for them. And there was a rumor that Apple had reacted badly to that. And we all thought that this was going to come out, and then we thought, well, maybe they're just going to sneak up on it by adding more and more features to Photos, which they could still do. But it does feel like, Pixelmator is a pretty complete package. So I think that releasing it on its own, and I think eventually potentially making it free, and part of the, would probably make the most sense for Apple is to say, hey, on our platform, you have all these great tools. And if you add all the Apple tech to it and write it to Metal and do all the other things, it can do a lot of what, Apple wants to show is how much you can do. And Pixelmator has already leveraged a lot of the Apple libraries because it's not cross-platform. It does a lot of things very, very fast because now it doesn't have, the reason I don't use it as often as it doesn't have alpha channels. It doesn't show you alpha channels, doesn't give you access to them. Same problem that I have with the Affinity product is that they don't show the actual alpha channels. And I can't actually work with them, which I use pretty extensively in Photoshop. But I think that if Apple adds Apple Intelligence and adds a bunch of extra tech and really tunes this becomes a really good entry level and to medium to advanced. I mean, there are things in Photoshop that I don't think Pixelmator can do or could ever do. They're designed around designers, and people who do very high end work. I don't think that's their market. And I think that they know that, and I think Apple knows that. But there is, again, if we think about the pyramid, there are the people who need Photoshop right here, and this is the rest of the market. That's the, and I think I'm still in that little tip because of historical means is that I spent so many years using it. But I think that that's. I think that Apple could. I hope that Apple releases it as a standalone product and just simply amps it up. I think that would be very exciting.
Jason?
One thing Apple's never really had is any sort of way to show vectors, and I'm hoping that that's what they make use of Pixelmator to do, some sort of vector-based workflow.
And Alexander?
Yeah, I'm optimistic. I agree to everything that was said already here. I think tighter integration between Apple's existing systems would be great. For example, like I kind of see it as like a way to be like a Photos advanced version of Photos, basically, of the Photos app. So it'd be nice to be able to just kick it to Pixelmator for advanced editing and have that seamless integration, that two-way bidirectional communication between those two. Of course, fixing all the issues that were already mentioned too with alpha channels would be nice. And just imagine how powerful Pixelmator could be if Apple added their own flavor of a generative art feature where it could just fill in stuff like Photoshop. I mean, I could see a lot of people, not of super advanced Photoshop users, canceling their subscriptions, but I could see a lot of people that just use it for that feature canceling subscriptions if Apple did that.
So my 2 cents on this, and this comes from a little thing that I read a little while ago about Wall Street and Apple and their services revenue. I have a sneaking suspicion, supported by nothing other than sneaking suspicions in me, that they are working on an entire suite of iOS tools for their incredibly huge phone/iPad base. We noticed that iPad now has Final Cut for iPad that is a small subscription play as opposed to a buy once, own forever play. I can see them taking Photos Pixelmator and running it into a bundle of things like that is very low cost and allows an incredible amount of photo manipulation. Then they got video manipulation on the Final Cut for iPhone Play, and they're starting to build out a suite because I think they see the future as the young people who are growing up on iOS devices for their creative work, and they want to start expanding that out. I also do think when you've got that many people with iPhones, the lure of subscription revenue is pretty hard and pretty compelling to turn away from a pure business play. So that's my thinking about it. Alex, you want to come back in on it?
I agree that you could potentially do a subscription play. I really hope they don't. I mean, I'm just done. Like I opened up I did Final Cut and Logic for a little while, and then I just turned it off. I was like, I just don't want to pay anymore. I think that we're all burned out of subscriptions, and so I think that everyone went to that well too often, and I find myself turning off every month. I'm turning more and more subscriptions off. I'm looking really hard at, do I really use this enough to make it worth paying every month for something? And I think that that's the backlash is coming, and I think that I think it's not that I'm not willing to spend. I think that the issue that I have is that if there's something ongoing that I'm getting, subscriptions don't bother me. If it's just paying for something that's sitting on my computer, subscriptions bother me a lot. And I get that it helps the developer. I understand the business model for the developer. I just don't understand the business model for the user. And I think that that's the real challenge. And I hope that Apple doesn't do that. I don't think I would follow along. I mean, I pay a subscription for Photoshop. Pixelmator is not a replacement for Photoshop. So people like me will just go, okay. And the problem with that for Apple is that if Apple released Pixelmator free, people like me would build content on how to use it. In fact, I looked at it when Pixelmator came out about you building content. It just wasn't literally the lack of alpha channels and the lack of TGA outputs. TGA is what we use for our Blackmagic switchers. I went to Pixelmator and asked them for TGA output, and they were like, "Oh, we're not going to get to that." And I went to Affinity and asked for TGA outputs, and they put it in. That's why I ended up with Affinity was because I could output TGAs without Photoshop. And so I think that Pixelmator, if they put it out for free, I'd build training for it. If they don't put it out for free, I probably won't even install it.
I 100% agree with almost everything you said in that whole rant, and I am sad to see if they go down that subscription path. I'll be sad to see it because I've been one of the biggest advocates against that model, because I do think that in every case where I've had subscription software, I found myself putting it away and not using it for 4 or 5 months, and I'm going, why am I paying monthly for something I'm not using?
I think that's the issue, is that I look at something that I'm paying subscriptions for, and I just get bitter and angry that I just spent a bunch of money on something that I'm not using.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Nigel, your thoughts?
Well, I was only going to point out that subscriptions might not do much for the user, but they do a lot for the multiple of the companies selling it.
That's
much more. You get a much better multiple for a subscription business. It's much easier to plan your budgets. Having said that, I'm desperately trying to work out how to shut down my Adobe subscription because I really just have the photo one, so I've been playing with Photolab to see whether I can get it. I think if I could find something that did a good job to replace Lightroom, I could get away without Photoshop because I don't need all that Alex needs. So I've run both types of software businesses. Let me tell you, subscription businesses are much easier to run than one-time license charges. But I understand the other side of that too.
Yeah, compellingly, it's just financials, and it's sad. I have not had an Adobe subscription for anything, I guess, going on 2 years now, and I found plenty of distance in. I haven't found anything I haven't been able to do that I've needed to do there. I do understand people who are deeply built into that ecosystem and can't extract themselves. I think that was part of the subscription model earlier, particularly the no standalone version. So if you have a library built in the Adobe suite and you stop subscribing, most of your creative input you're cut off from, which I think has always been a tragedy. But it is how that works. And if you bought into it, you're stuck in there kind of a little bit now. Which is great for the company, not so great for the individual user. Those are my personal feelings. Have nothing to do with anything else. And I'm hoping that Apple, if they find a way to do this, finds a way to make it not quite so lock away and you must continue to pay the subscription forever to keep access to all the effort and time you've put into their software suite. That's my 2 cents as an individual. Next question.
This one's for me. I'm planning my next round of studio upgrades. I'd like to move to a Blackmagic Design 2ME as it will give me more inputs and outputs and clean up my wiring. I will need HDMI to SDI converters. What's the ISO recording replacement coming from the ATEM Mini?
Alex Lindsay, dive in.
I'm on my way to doing something similar to you. I'm going to be moving from my HDMI based, ATEM Mini Extreme to something more. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to figure it out. To the point that you're making, I feel like I've just taken the HDMI flow as far as it can go. And I need more I/O. I need and I don't know. I don't necessarily need more MEs, but I definitely need more I/O. And I'm just I love having an HDMI matrix, an 8x8, but it's not the same as a router. So I just want to put a router back in, and so I'm trying to kind of figure that out because I pre-program a lot of these screens and camera systems and everything else, and so as I move forward, I'm doing the same thing. You can't really, once you go past the Mini Extreme, you're not going to have ISO recording. So think about whether you may want to go to SDI, just the SDI, because you'll get more outputs from the SDI version of the Extreme, but you don't have any ISO records there. At that point, you're really talking about, taking something in, outputting, again, if you have a lot of outputs on a 2ME, so if you get the ATEM Extreme, I don't know what it is, or ATEM Constellation 2ME or whatever, I don't know what it is, but it's like 12 outputs or some large, you could theoretically run it out of there into a smaller ATEM and just record all the ISOs if you wanted to. But past that, you're really talking about getting things that can record, whether that's software or hardware. You can definitely buy things that will record many channels at one time. So that might be the solution that you're going to end up with. Those are HyperDecks, mini HyperDecks, but there's also software recorders. There's Softron makes a recorder. There's a bunch of other ones that'll work there as well. So, but recording I think that the least expensive way to do it would probably be to route a bunch of those things out to an ATEM Extreme. Like just a little ATEM Extreme and grab eight of those channels out. The next step up from there would probably be the ATEM Minis or these little HDMI. You get a whole stack of these little ones. I have one of the shuttles. I think you could get a bunch of those, and that would probably let you input those. I have not been super successful at recording with them. I have one. Maybe just the format stuff. It just seems like it's quirky, compared to the HyperDecks that I'm used to. So anyway, I think that that's what I would look at there. And you have to decide how often you're going to go back to the ISOs. If you're really editing a lot from ISOs, you can either have just a really good program, or you can have those ISOs. Now, what I've done on shows that I needed a lot of ISOs that were software based, of course, I was using Mimo Live because Mimo Live can just sit there and you can just stack up all the records if your computer's fast enough and your drives are fast enough. Mimo will record all the ISOs for you as you're recording. So you just have to decide, but that obviously is not going to be as many inputs as a Constellation.
Jesse Kester.
Quick question, Alex. Does the ATEM SDI send record triggers to the camera when you record at board level for those ISOs so that you can have the raw backups from the in-camera?
Not that I know of. I don't think there's any way to. It does when you have the extreme and you hit record and the cameras have returns, they're all going to start recording at the same time. So they all slave to the extreme. So that works if you have the returns from the camera. So then you're recording 6Ks in there, and they'll just drop right into the resolve file, and you can replace your footage with that footage to get back to 6K. So it's a pretty luxurious thing to do, but the larger switchers don't do that.
Next question.
Next question is from TJ Asher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. After some recent software updates, I've noticed that the available space on my Mac has dramatically decreased. Can anyone recommend a good drive map utilization software for macOS to see where the space has gone?
Sure. Nigel Dessau is going to start us out. Nigel?
Well, my only observation here was going to be make sure in your settings you don't have iCloud to automatically remove stuff you don't use regularly if you want it there. So the fastest space saver is that. So you go into settings, go into the drive, make sure your iCloud settings suit what you want, because it will move photos, it will move documents, it will even move, I think, unused applications off. I do know there's a thing called Space Saver in Sequoia, which is reducing the amount of storage needed to install apps. But I would really check. I mean, there are lots of apps that will give you a view of the disk map. I can't remember the one I use. It's Daisy something. But check your iCloud settings.
Jason Beish.
I've used a lot of these over the years, and the one that I really have settled on is in the App Store, and it's completely free. It's called Disk Space Analyzer, and it does this really, really pretty, just kind of circular, out-moving pie chart bar graph thing that is color-coded by file type, and then if you move into it, it's by directory. It's pretty nice, and it's pretty quick. Daisy Disk is I think what Nigel is talking about, and it too works very well.
Alex?
Yeah, the one that I use is Grand Perspective. I had the same issue I brought up in office hours maybe a year ago. I was having an app. It was a test app that suddenly was, every time I turned something on, it would save 500 megs. Like it would just, like, these boxes. And it was an amazing image that I got from Grand Perspective of, I threw it on and it suddenly, you just saw this huge chunk of random stuff that was there. I mean, it was literally taking up, it was like a cancer. Like it had taken up like 500 gigs from my computer, and I couldn't figure out why. I was like, I can't be running out of space this fast. And it was just writing log files, big log files. And it was verbose. You know, when you see that, right, the ability to turn off verbose logging, that was why. So anyway, so that was the issue. And I couldn't have found it without Grand Perspective.
Jason, you want to come back in?
Yeah, I did not know that Grand Perspective was available for Mac. It has always been my favorite in PC, and yeah, you really need to see it to believe it. It's $2.99 on the App Store, and go right now, because the graphical output alone is worth it.
There's a picture of it. I've been using it for about the past 8 years. It is a fabulous thing. Each one of those little color squares, even down to the granular level, shows files on your machine. So if you see something like at the center bottom, you'll see a big kind of beige square. And I'm going, what is that big file? So you just click on it and it'll tell you exactly what it is, where it is, and you can decide whether or not you still need it. It's great in terms of understanding. The other thing I love understanding about it is that, like, big group up in the upper right-hand corner of blue squares. That means there's probably a folder somewhere with a lot of little files, and you're going, what am I keeping in there? And maybe that would be something like what Alex was talking about, with just a whole bunch of utility files that have been stored away and growing forever, and you didn't know they were there. And this really gives you a visual map to what it is and why it's there. Yeah. $2.99, well worth it. And I've had Grand Perspective for probably, like I said, 6-7 years. And for $2.99, one of the best investments I ever made. Next question.
From Paul Vahus in Austin, Texas, what newer or equivalent light set would allow remote access via internet for 12 by 14 room with a decent control panel?
Alex Lindsay, what do you think?
I don't think it's really a light. I think that what you're looking for is a system that's going to allow you to do this. So there's a couple things that I think you're going to need, and hope maybe if Tlaloc's watching, he'll throw something in here. But my guess is, based on my experience, is that the number one thing you're going to need is lights that have DMX. So it's not a brand, but a system. So there's other things that you can use. They're all going to be wonky. DMX just works. In that space, you're going to need ArtNet. So ArtNet is going to convert IP information into DMX, and so it's got an Ethernet on one side and it's got XLR on the other side. Not XLR that you would use for the lights. You can do short runs with regular XLR cable, but it's a different. It's 50 ohm versus 75 ohm. So the lights will be on DMX. You'll have ArtNet to get IP information, and then you need a VPN. So then the VPN you're going to VPN from wherever you are in the world into that location. And once you're VPN'd in, you can send those commands over IP via the ArtNet to the DMX to the lights. And that's the process that I think you're going to go there. The easiest thing to do, of course, you can get boards. There's all kinds of boards that can convert that. Luminaire on the iPad is a pretty simple one that would let you probably do everything you need to do in there. You can get more complicated, but I think that Luminaire on the iPad would be the thing that I would start with. Or you can just go crazy and get an ETC board or a Grand MA. You could have a Grand MA on one side and then figure out how to tie it back there. I mean, I think that would be way over the top, but amazing to see. If you do that, let me know. But Luminaire is probably all you need.
Next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles is asking, when should I retire an eneloop rechargeable battery? Jason
Bass, what do you think?
The short answer is once you recognize that they're starting to slow down. But if you look at the manufacturer, apparently standard eneloop are 2100 cycles, which I have a hard time believing. The eneloop Pro is up to 500, and then the older eneloop are 15 to 1800 times. And there's a difference between the Chinese manufactured versus the Japanese manufactured. Let's see. Yeah, the ones in China, 5,000 cycles and 3,000 cycles for Japan. Yeah, it's all over the place. I mean, I would just get a battery meter and, mark when you get them. I always put a label when I actually buy them and just, start cycling them out when they start annoying you.
I bought a page of little tiny rectangular stickers, and I always, whenever I buy a new set of batteries, stick it on there and put the date in service, because after 5 years or so, I start to wonder, it depends, batteries are so different. Some of them you cycle quickly, some of them you leave them in for 3 or 4 months before you have to get a new one in there. Just depends on the duty cycle you're putting it through. But yeah, batteries do age out. I think we all know that. Next question.
This question's from me. Can the Blackmagic Design Micro Studio 4K G2 camera be controlled remotely via the ATEM Mini or even a Constellation?
Alex?
I'm not 100% certain because I haven't used it, but I will tell you that the original can absolutely be controlled from it. Zoom, focus, color, all of those things are available to the G1. And the reason I'm careful about saying that I don't know is because, we used to think that all the Blackmagic cameras would be shadable, but then I bought a couple 12Ks that aren't shadable. And it was kind of like, we'll get around to it, and it never happened. So I would buy from somewhere that you can return them and see if it works. Or look on internet. I haven't needed to get another G2, which is why I've got a couple G1s laying around and haven't needed a G2. The advantage of the G2 is being able to, put LUTs into it, and it's a higher resolution, and there's a bunch of, added creature comforts to it. But I haven't needed it yet. But I know that the G1 is absolutely controllable via the, from it. And it's got a little breakout cable, and you have SDI in, SDI out. You just send it in, off you go.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asks, could Frame.io be or conceivably be used for sports video review and analysis, or are there specialized platforms for that use case?
Alex, what do you think?
I mean, you can use anything for anything, but this would not be a great platform for it. I mean, you could probably use it. I don't think you could do it for live TV. There'd be too much delay and too much, you need much more better controls over the playback. to make that actually work. If you're trying to do something live, I don't think that I would. You could post a bunch of them there, and then coaches could go up and look at this place and look at this place and everything else, potentially even circling things. There's some drawing tools in there. So it's not that you couldn't use it. It just probably wouldn't be at the top of the list.
Yeah, I guess that to me, it depends on what you mean by review and analysis. If you're trying to do just overview review and analysis, that's one thing. Coaches have become so sophisticated, particularly in terms of identifying biomechanical problems or things like that athletes do, that the specialized tools for that allow you to really isolate, not just draw on, but follow, for example, a pitcher's motion to see where they might be doing something that could be biomechanically improved. It's just gotten to be such a science that I would think that the bespoke tools to do that would probably get you farther if that's what you're doing. If you're just commentating on something on a YouTube channel, it might work just fine. Next question.
Jesse Kester and Glendale here on the panel. Drama bordering on fisticuffs on set. One of our staff insists on over-under for cables that carry signal and over-over for cables that carry electricity. The other says over-under for all. Can we put this controversy to rest before blood is shed?
I'm going to let Alex go first. I'm sure we both have extreme impressions on this. Alex, take it away.
I over-under everything. I think I over under pretty much everything you can. There for very large power cables. You're really talking about figure eights. Let's see, Mickey actually mentioned figure eights here, thicker gauge cables. So we do I will over under almost every cable that I have, and then I will figure eight very large power cables. And we've also figure eighted. We just used this recently, and I hadn't thought about this, but to make sure that it just comes out really nice and easy, we figure eighted the SDI feed to a camera. We had a long camera run that was going to start on one side of where the cable was and go to the other side. And we just built a figure eight out of it because it just very comfortably comes off of that area. So that would be the only exception. But I would definitely, there's a lot of us that would argue that over is putting a lot of stress on the cable, and a cable like power is actually more sensitive to the over-under versus over than even some of the other cables that you would look at, like an SDI cable. So I think that we think that it over-under for everything or almost everything. When in doubt, over-under. So yeah.
I agree 250% on that. And you will notice a big white card down here because I thought this was so much fun to talk about that I got three separate gauges of cables. And for those of you who don't know what we're talking about, if you take any kind of cable, and I'm going to take the medium-sized cable here, right? And you just do it like that. In fact, let me just get a little touch of this, and I'm just going to do a regular coil here, and you stretch that out and you can see what happens. You just get a really janky result, which is why I never ever, just as Alex said, never do I wrap it around my shoulder or, hand to elbow and just go regular clockwise because it kinks up your cables and makes them a mess. The over-under thing is pretty simple. You just twist it one way to do the first loop, and then you twist it the other way underside to do the loop beyond it. And if you do that with a long cable and then you pull it out, what do you end up with? A perfectly straight cable that has no kinks in it. So this is the fundamental reason that we teach everybody to over-under. At some point, even with tiny cables, it becomes just second nature. You're just going to do that even if you're putting something in your iPhone case. And again, if you just quickly do it and get used to it, they all stay perfectly straight and there's none of those kinks in them and they don't create a mess in your bag. As cables get bigger, all the way up to a standard like microphone cable, it's just as easy to do the over-under thing. And I probably didn't have that high enough for you to see it. But to me, the key learning piece to learn how to over-under a cable is your thumb and first finger twist. If you twist to the right and then twist to the left and tuck that next coil in there, that's the quickest way to do over-under. I've seen people do it other ways, but it's really fast. And once you learn how to do it, you can literally do a 100-foot cable in maybe 45 seconds or something like that. You just get really used to that process. So learn to do it, do that. As cables get bigger, it becomes more and more important to do it. And I remember when I had to learn the figure eight, it was only when I got into triax cables, which is a heavy camera cable that literally is hugely heavy. And we were packing them into crates to be shipped. And for those kind of super heavy cables, the figure eight layout does kind of a version of this so that they come out straight. But that's the important thing. If you find that you're pulling your cables out of something and they're all twisty and messed up when they get out, it's because you're not doing this. And you should learn to do it the right way, because if you don't, it doesn't make sense. Alexander Knight, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, okay. Before I say that, did you notice that Bill, when he was first doing the example of the over-under, he wasn't even looking down. He was looking directly at the camera, making eye contact. That's a guy that guy has had some practice. Anyways, I think you should go even one step above for power. You should go the audiophile way. You get these little cable risers, and you have all your power cables suspended off the floor.
Oh,
That's a joke. That's a joke.
I love watching Alex go, oh.
No.
Avoid inducted power reflection off of your desktop.
My tendency is I run, so admittedly, with a solid Star Quad XLR cable, you're not going to pick up any, you're not going to really pick up any stuff from the power cables. But when left to my own devices, I will run all my signal up one side of the room and all my power down the other side of the room. Like, I don't even try to raise them up. I just get them on the other side. You know, like, do we need to have power on this side? And where you need it, you put it in, but you don't have lots and lots of power just completely embedded with all your audio cables. I know that theoretically that works. I've heard, when I have buzz and I have power cables next to my audio cables, I now have a variable that I can't remove. That's why I do it. It's not so much that I think it's happening. It's that there's a variable there that I can't say, oh, well, everything's completely separated. It's not going to be a problem. So I'm still old fashioned in the sense that if I'm going to cross an audio cable, I tend to do it at a right angle. And then I also try to stay away from them altogether. The one little note, by the way, that we used growing up for some other things is that if you go over under, and you'll do this by accident sometimes with your cables, and you wonder what happened. If you go over under, and then you take the outside cable and pull it through the center, it'll make knots. it'll make knots at every roll. It'll just pull them out. Now, the reason that's interesting is almost always that's a bug. But if you see those knots, it means someone pulled through it means you pulled through the cable. A lot of people don't know what that means. Like, why do I suddenly have all these loose knots along there? It's because you pulled an over under through the center, and you get these little knots at the same. Now, the feature, how you use that is if you have a rope and you want to climb up something, you go over. No, you literally, this is the way you do it. You do an over under, and then you pull the rope through it, and you pull it out, and you tighten it, and now you have at a very regular interval, you have knots that you can climb up. And it's at one point I could do that with a V, one of my legs in a V. so a long time ago. So anyway,
did anybody expect us to spend this much time?
I know, exactly.
It's a fundamental of the industry.
And we went from over under to farm tricks. So anyway.
But this is something that if you've been on cruise for a long time, it's one of the things. Literally, you should practice this. If you're a young person trying to get into the business,
the people will make a lot of decisions about you very, very quickly based on how you roll your cables. If you want to get into the industry and you learning how to do over under quickly, if you do it over your elbow. They will not ever make you roll cables again, but they'll also decide that you don't know what you're doing very quickly. And so there's a bunch. You're what we like to call a producer. So you do have to be careful. So if you want to show off that you're a producer who's never done actually any production, just go over your elbow. It'll work great. But if you do it in a faulting way, they know that you haven't done very much production. If you do it really fast, not looking like while you're talking to them, and you're just cranking through it, then they know that you've been doing this for a long time. And people make this. There's a whole bunch of decisions that people will make pretty quickly about you. And I would highly recommend just sitting. If you're watching TV and you haven't done over under, there's tons of videos on YouTube. We're not going to show you how to do it, but you should learn it You should practice it. Just sit there and get a 10-foot cable and do over under. It's not just the over under. It is common loops, which means that they're all the same. So you can always tell someone who's really good at it because it's a nice, perfect circle, not like a bunch of stuff that is all over the place. And we could probably do a whole hour on just rolling cables.
Yeah, easily.
We're not going to do it right now,
but go for
we
it.
got close. 7 minutes.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say is it's not just good if you're looking for a crew job. If you're a one-man band, I highly suggest you learn this because it makes strike and pack so much faster if you know how to do this. And then the next time when you get home and you decide, oh my gosh, I used a little too much gaff tape on that and I took it out wrong and all of a sudden I have to clean my cables. Every time you have to handle these at home or anywhere else, if you learn this, you will find your life getting easier in little ways. When, you grab your cable in your office off the rack and you pull it out and it's straight and it hasn't been trained wrong, it just makes your life a little tiny bit easier.
Last thing is the sun is your friend. so if something's got a bunch of kinks to it, a lot of times I'll throw it out. I'll lay it out on my deck or lay it out not somewhere cars are going to drive. But you lay it out, let it sit for a couple minutes or maybe half an hour and come back and it'll roll much nicer.
All right, time to head to the next question.
This one's from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Discuss the different levels of wake up on LAN, both for local and remote applications, Mac and PC. Thanks.
Jason.
This is really more of a question of how sleep is different between Mac and PC. So Mac does this really well, and it's because the whole system is integrated all the way down. And unless you're using an external Ethernet, it basically, with one check in macOS, works every time. With PC, you have S through S4 and then technically S5. So S0 is the system is up. S1 through S3 is sleep, which means it's in a low power state to some degree. And if you remove power, the system gets very upset. S4 is hibernate, which means everything in the RAM gets dumped to the hard drive, and you can actually remove power from the system and put power back in, and it won't be upset. S5 is a soft off, which is how usually Windows 11 works. And then mechanical off is G3, technically for the BIOS. So at the end of the day, Wake on LAN is simple. It's a magic wake-up packet that powers up the system. If you have an Ethernet cable that is through PCI, PCI also needs to be powered. At the end of the day, that's really all you need to know about it.
Very nice, Jason. Thank you so much. Next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. Anyone have experience using the XLR adapter for the Sony FX30?
Alexander Knight, start us off.
I haven't used that specific one, but my co-host on the podcast that I do has one for his FX3. It works really well. Lots of camera companies make stuff like this. Like my Panasonic Lumix in front of me here has the Panasonic XLR, what they call a digital hot shoe accessory, because it actually makes a digital connection and sends that audio direct through the camera body. It doesn't use any physical wires, and it gives you a nice, clean way of getting either a microphone signal or even a balanced line audio signal into the camera as well. And because it's embedded over the HDMI or SDI output of whatever camera you're using, that's going to be perfectly in sync, or at least in theory, or much better in sync than it would if you had your audio system, which would be typically, complete. If it's completely separate, then you got to think about sync.
Alex Lindsay.
I have one. It works fine. It's not a great preamp. It's noisy. So I wouldn't use it for mics. so I guess that's what I would say. I mean, from what I'm used to, and I have to admit that almost everything I do is with a sound, some version of a sound device's recorder that then outputs to whatever I'm doing. So I very rarely use these as mic inputs. But I wouldn't normally recommend it. It's a little noisy. If you clean it up or it doesn't, you're okay with a little bit of noise that you're going to get rid of later, I think it's probably fine. And this is the case with all camera preamps. All of these little ones that attach to the cameras. For news gathering and for basic work, it's fine. But for anything that's critical, you're going to want to get past it. They also don't handle overmodulation very well. So if you give it, if the signal goes up too high, you're gonna crunch it. So those are the things to kind of think about as you do that. But as a general use case, I'm actually building something right now that I'm pondering whether to use it on an FX6. It's the same handle or similar handle. Similar interface going through the hot shoe mount.
For those of you who might be new to the show, don't forget our entire show is run by your questions for today or for any other day. If you'd like to get into the process and ask something, use the QR code, shoot that. It'll get you right into the queue. If you want to get a little more involved in the show, you can use the link that's at the top of this to get here, or you can go into our regular system in the back end, sign up for office hours at officehours.global, and in that case, you can actually participate with the people in the back end in terms of voting on the questions up and down. The questions that get the most votes, we get to quicker and spend more time on, so that's how the system works every day here on the show. Let's get to our next question. Alexander?
From the QR code, Kane Treble in Mildura, Australia, you've been tasked with engineering the next ATEM Mini audio inputs. What would you replace the existing terrible inputs with low budget and best option?
Jesse Kester, start us off.
I'm going to skip low budget and best and go right to most likely. And if they were to replace the audio inputs, it would probably be with the Mini XLR that you find on all the Blackmagic cameras. Here's hoping they do that.
Alex Lindsay.
It'd be great if they didn't make the Mini XLR backwards, like they do for the the Mini XLR for the 6K is backwards. It's backwards, which means that every other Mini XLR that you have, every TA3 that you own for everything else doesn't fit. So you have to buy your own cables for all your 6Ks because they did this thing. I think it just looked nicer. I feel like that must have been it. It looks nice. It doesn't have little spiky things coming out of the camera. We'll just make it flat, but it's the reverse of what everything else does. So hopefully they wouldn't do that, but they might because it would look nicer and doesn't have little spiky things sticking out of it. I do agree with Jesse that the most likely version of this is going to be the most likely outcome will be a TA3, some kind of version of a TA3 and XLR. The two XLRs there that are available. If I was going to do it, I would just want to make sure that they had really good preamps, which they won't. They'll have okay preamps. I would love for Blackmagic to call sound devices and pay them whatever is required to get those preamps, but they're not going to. So, and for line input, I think they'd be fine. I think that for mic inputs, I will say that after a lot of complaining, with careful gain structure, I have found that the two audio inputs into the Mini Extreme work okay, but you just have to be super careful and very detailed about making sure that you're making sure that it's corrected as far as gain.
Alexander Knight.
Yeah, I would just make the ATEM a little bit thicker. I don't like mini ports at all, especially at Mini XLR. And I don't want to have to use dongles or adapters or anything. So full-sized, Neutrik, locking tab, XLR jacks, analog inputs. If adding AES inputs probably would be handy too. Some form of, some way of getting digital audio in would be nice. Doubt they would ever do it, but that would be cool.
Alex, let's see. Jason Bache.
I had and still have, it's back there, the ATEM Studio 4K that was all SDI, and it had beautiful audio inputs, and they were very low noise level, but they were never in sync, and it absolutely drove me crazy. So, yeah, they've done good audio inputs in the past, but it's never been perfect.
Alex Lindsay, last word.
Yeah, I wish that I know that they're not going to cover Dante because they don't want to pay for the licensing. But if they're not going to cover Dante, I would love for them to do something like Ravenna, just maybe make actual Ravenna usable for average people, which would take a little bit of a lift, but Blackmagic could pull it off.
Next question.
Harold Williams in Portsmouth, Virginia. I need a SIM card with priority data suitable for live streaming at a busy event. Any tips for getting one from East Coast carriers?
Jason Bache is going to help you out. Jason?
This is hyper local. It really, really depends on where you're going to be on the East Coast. I would go there in advance and figure out, where your best data is coming from. Broadly speaking, I've had pretty good luck with Verizon, at least in New England. I can't really speak to Virginia. I've never done live streaming right there.
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Mickey. Is that I would just get a live view. rent a live view. It'll cost you about $2,500, I think, for that, to make that happen. So it might be outside of your budget. But if you're really looking for something that matters, you're going to get a whole bunch of modems. They're all going to work together, and they're going to it's going to work as well as any cellular package, because they already are making those priority data agreements with all the providers. And so if it's going to work, it's going to work with a live view if you're using cellular. Live views also have an Ethernet input, so you can do things like take a Starlink and feed it into the live view or a house connection or Wi-Fi. It'll bond all of those solutions together and then do the best it can from it. There's a little bit of latency there. It's a little harder to do two-way and have it be stable. But if you give it 5 seconds, and in the worst case scenario, 8 seconds of latency, you can get it to go a long time. I haven't used more than 5 seconds on a live view for a decade. So,
next question.
Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona. What are your favorite accessories to use with the Sanken COS11Ds for miking up subjects when you don't want to see the mic?
Alex Lindsay, take him through.
The most popular ones are some version of Moleskine. Bumblebee makes a lot of accessories for this. So I would say Bumblebee is the first place that I would probably look. Ursa, not the camera, but there's a company that actually makes accessories for this as well. And those are the ones that I would find on the internet. I have to admit that when I buy these, it's usually because I'm in Burbank and I go to Location Sound, and I just wander around and go, oh, I never thought of that. Oh, I never thought of this. So that's usually how I buy those things. If I'm in New York, I'm going to be in New York on sometime soon, and I will probably end up at Gotham or to look at stuff. I would definitely, if you're in one of those locations, I always recommend in New York going to Film Tools and On Location Sound, and in New York, I would look at going to Gotham and B&H, just because you get to see things you'll never see in person otherwise. Definitely worth it if you have a little extra time. Mickey says Dr. Scholl's Moleskine Top Stick Toupee Tape, Transpore, Micropore, and Ursa foamies, as well as Rycode overcovers, undercovers, and Joe's Stick Stuff. So those are other ones to look at. And this is dealing with the mic. The other thing a lot of times people deal with is how do you deal with the transmitter? And the transmitter is something that you oftentimes get body wraps for, that you want to put the transmitter in. Sometimes you're trying to move that mic cable down. Look for things like a mic bullet. Don't try to fly with it, because the TSA will not have any sense of humor about it, because it does look like a bullet. But what it does is puts a weight at the end of your TA3, TA4, TA5. So it just drops down someone's back without having to wrestle with it. It's life-changing when you have it, but you can't fly with it.
I plus one on everything that's been said here. The tips from Alex and Mickey will stand you in good stead. I'll never forget the first time I had to go into a drugstore and buy Dr. Scholl's corn pads because I didn't bring something along with me. So, yeah, Moleskine is one of the things that you always want to have there. Next question.
Robert Shoji in Los Angeles. Do you place your camera at eye level when shooting interviews?
Jesse Kester.
The answer is it depends. We usually don't start at eye level. The lowest we'll go is like halfway between eyes and heart. But the thing that we try to be really sensitive to is how the subject feels about their neck, and we try to be sensitive without bringing it up, just kind of getting like an idea of where they might be on how much of their neck they want the audience to see. And the less they want seen, the more we'll raise the camera up. I think we got our lens right about mouth level today. But the lower you go, the more kind of like powerful they feel at a potential cost, depending on their sensitivities.
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, the main thing that drives this in general, when we're doing standing interviews, we like to be at shoulder level. It makes people look more important, but we often will. We often go a little bit higher, and definitely when people are seated, we tend to lean higher on that, specifically because of double chins. so if someone's got a double chin, a lot of times they'll see the footage later and go, "Oh, I'd really like to re-record that." So and I deal with a lot of executives. I mean, actors don't have as many double chins because they either never had them or fixed it, and so you don't have as much of that to worry about from actors, but from executives. they get pretty sensitive about it. And they don't really think about it until they see it. So a lot of times our lighting is really designed to define the chin, and then the camera placement is designed to pull the chin up a little bit so that they're less likely to show that. And those two things together get rid of about 80% of double chins. And if they don't get rid of it, then it's not going to, you can't avoid it. It's just going to be there. So
you've gotten great advice here. I'm just going to leave it at that. Next question.
Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. Is this a good 4-inch long desk-mounted holder for lights or 4 foot for lights and phones, or could I do better budget?
Jason, do you know which one? Did you look up the one he's
Yeah, I did.
about?
I had a second to look at this, and in fact, it came across my Amazon feed too. It looks okay, as long as what you're suspending isn't too terribly heavy. I would think that one step up would be the Elgato ones, but yeah, pretty good bang for your buck. I don't know. I don't have them, but yeah, they look pretty good.
Yeah, I can't see what it is, but we're seeing more of those kind of things on all the sales sites. I think with all the podcasting or vidcasting from home people are doing, this looks like an actual business. And so the Chinese companies I know are coming into a lot of production on this. Alex, what do you think?
unless my tabletop is 1 inch or 1.5 inches stone, I will not attach my cameras to the table. So the thing is I just don't do that because it vibrates. Every time you touch it, it's going to vibrate. I don't like to have my mic. This mic is not attached to the table. This camera, not attached to the table. so it's, in fact, there's 2 tables in front of it before I get to it. So you just want to be very careful of things that are going to cause vibration. It's probably one of the number one things we see people have trouble with.
Yeah. Next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. For shooting a wedding with PTZs, could static shots be better than constantly moving the cameras? I'll be working in an outdoor venue and trying to map out cable paths and working to keep cables to a minimum. Thanks.
Jesse Kester.
I think PTZs are good for your wider shots, but I feel like you're going to want to have a manned camera for your close-ups of, when they're doing the vows, when they put on the ring, when they do the kiss. You really want to be there capturing that moment with a human operator who's able to move around and get those shots. The other thing I'd be really thinking about is audio. That seems to be the biggest whiff when we shoot weddings, is there's no plan for miking the vows, so it's just bad audio. And then what's the point of an hour-long recording that you can't hear of people standing still?
Alex Lindsay.
Yeah, the thing that I use PTZs a lot, and my favorite way to do this, if there's any way that you can make it work, is that you use a host of PTZs and one operated camera. So we use this for these all the time, which is that we have one, for instance, our most standard way of doing interviews is a bunch of FR7s and an FX6. The FX6 is our roaming camera. We put a good camera operator behind it and let them find the shots that they need, and then everything else is static. You can move things with PTZs. It depends on what depends on is the quality of the PTZ and the quality of the controller. So the joystick controller that you have, you really have to have a good joystick controller, and B, someone who knows how to use it that has a lot of experience. You're not going to grab an intern or someone else and say, okay, now I need you to do moving shots. You need a very seasoned PTZ operator to do that. The funny thing is, it's either not a camera operator, by the way, a PTZ operator, and you can hire them. Camera operators tend to not be very good at PTZs. They understand the framing, but they don't understand the thing, and they complain about them all the time. I did have a situation in New York, I think I've told the story before, where suddenly I noticed that there was moving shots, but I didn't have any camera operated cameras, and I looked over at my PTZ operator, and he was just doing all these moving shots, and they looked beautiful. And I said, "How are you doing that?" And he goes, "This controller is so much better than an Xbox." And I realized I was looking at all the wrong places for PTZ operators. So think about gamers, people who are really into gaming, specifically with consoles. You may want to have them try it because you may find that they're better than you'd think.
Nigel.
It's a long time since I'd done any wedding videos, but the deciding factor for me was always how much I was getting paid. And if I'm being paid very little, then I don't create a very complicated setup that requires lots of people, lots of cabling, lots of time. Also, if I needed to move to multiple places, so there was a church and then there was a reception, and all of those were complicating factors. And so, depending on if you're doing this for free or you're being paid, pick the setup that makes sense for the amount that you're being paid, and make sure you're clear with the decisions you're taking.
Alex, you want to get back in?
I just want to underline what Nigel said, and I just want to say how important what he just said is, not just for weddings, but for all production, is to never outrun your resources. You know, or you want to be very careful about that. When you're getting paid to do something, you know, look for a solution that you have the resources to execute on. I would say that one of the number one reasons that people have problems in production and failure is they tempted to do more than what the budget allowed and what their resources allowed. And that can be human resources, it can be physical resources, it can be time resources. But you have to make a decision of staying safely when you're getting paid for it. Like when I do volunteer work, I tend to be pretty aggressive about what we'll do, how far I'll push it, but still within a range of there's people that actually care about this content, and I want to make sure it's great. But it is better to have something that is solid. People won't remember that crazy shot that you did or whatever. What they'll remember is that you had black for 15 seconds, or the audio was breaking up, or camera turned off. All of those things are what they're going to remember, and so you just have to keep your elbows in, as we say in wrestling. Keep your elbows in, and try not to overextend yourself.
Yeah, I'm going to triple down on that. I think one of the biggest problems now is that so many people looking at social media can see so many extraordinarily shot weddings and events, and so the bar gets raised. Couples getting married or people doing events of some kind or another look online at what's happening, and they see these amazing glory. The drone comes in over the coastline and zooms down right to the bride's face kind of shots, and they think that that's easy. And it's not easy at all. So they will ask for the moon and the stars. And as has been articulated here, then somebody's going to say, I got $500 to do the video. Can you do this? And their expectations are way up here out of the frame, and their budgets are down here in the first little margin. And they want you to do that. And that is functionally impossible. So, the more experience people have, and hats off to the people who do wedding and event photography. That is a tough business to be in. They work very hard, and a lot of them are very dedicated to it, and it takes a lot of effort to do that consistently and well when this is the only time you can get this shot in history is right at the right moment. And to be prepared to get the right shot of that for that couple or event is no small task. Next question.
This one's for me. How does Genlock work?
Well, Genlock is a timing thing, and it has to do with a timekeeper setup. On traditional cameras, we used to use a thing called black burst or house sync, which was delivered on coax cables, and you would have a master timekeeper, generally either a camera sending black or an actual time code generator. And once that was established as the master, every other camera would be synced to that electronically so that every cut on a switcher happened exactly at the same black burst interval so that you could switch glitch-free between things. That was traditional Genlock. Today, a lot of that stuff is done internal in the camera, and there's a whole lot of frame shakers that will synchronize things post, but that was what the original Genlock was. And I'll let Alex go beyond that basic primer.
Yeah, and we still use Genlock a lot because it reduces as Bill said, a lot of switchers will now do a frame sync. And a frame synchronizer is not the same as Genlock. Frame synchronizer basically slows down some of the video signals with the other one. So it actually creates latency so that they all match up. And so it makes sure that they're all coming in, and you'll lose 1 to 2 frames as a frame sync manages that process. So that becomes important, especially with things like iMag. So iMag, you're trying to get that video right to the screen, and every frame matters because you can't delay your audio in real time. Like when you're in the room, you can't delay the audio. So you're trying to pull the latency of your video down as far as you possibly can to make sure that sync is as close as it can be. Because it does look weird when a person's standing in front of themselves and the person on the big screen, I've seen this, it's 5 to 6 frames behind the person on the stage. Looks super weird. So Genlock is something that is still important. You're going to be able to, and what you do is it's either a black burst or a tri-sync. Or tri-level sync. And basically it is exactly what Bill said. It's sending out a signal that allows every device, not just the cameras, but every device to be expecting frames at exactly the same moment. And that's going to primarily reduce your latency. There are some pieces of hardware, high-end hardware, that won't even work if you don't have it. So if you have an EBS, an EBS won't produce signal until you give it a Genlock. So it is. So those are the things you want. That's how it works, though.
Let's go to the next question.
Paul Vahus in Austin, Texas. Does anyone on Office Hours or anyone you know have a name that is an aptonym for being a media professional?
Oh, Jesse, what do you think?
We work with a married couple, both of whom are freelancers, and their last name is Beastie, and that has always borne out that they are beasts when it comes to production. We have worked with a model named Liz Pleasant, and that was absolutely true about her. And not quite an aptronym, but when we were in Tokyo, we would often shoot tandem with a gentleman named Chris Postnikoff, and we would always be saying, we're popping off shots like Chris Postnikoff's got.
Oh, man, I'm glad I never had to announce that. Thanks. Jason Beige.
All right, aptronyms. I always love the ones that stuntmen have, but I know a Mary Frost who is a meteorologist. That's about as good as I've got.
I went to high school with a girl named Candy Kane. She was sweet. All right, let's move on. Next question.
We're at the end of the hour.
We don't have to. Next question. Thank you all for joining us today for Office Hours. We truly appreciate it. Don't forget that the T-shirts are still available, I believe. Alex, are we still?
Yeah, until November 20th. November 20th, you can go to officehours.global/shop. Those T-shirts go $20 of that goes to supporting Office Hours. So it's a donation with something that's there. These are original T-shirts. So they will not. We're going to keep moving the designs around as we get going. So this will be the only time you see this design, which I'm quite fond of. So I'm going to have to buy a couple of these to make sure I have a couple. So that's that you can now give us money if you just want to. You don't want the T-shirt and you just want to give us money. You can go to officehours.global/donate. Your donations and your T-shirt purchases make a huge difference for us. We do need to make ends meet, and so hopefully you can do one or the other as what works for you.
And Office Hours is technically a 501c3, so this is a charitable contribution to the extent that it is allowed under whatever tax system you're working under. Thanks very much for watching today. Our Teletraversal, 36,000 miles. That's 58,000 kilometers. And as always, 288 million bananas for scale. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks for watching.
It was a fun one to end on. I think we have I think about like a funny question for the end of hours.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's always the stuntmen with the best nicknames. You know, Steve Bam Bam falls off a building.
There are some, of course, that would be funny in different countries where different words have different meanings.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
Oh. The Chevy Nova comes to mind.
Yeah, there was something that we said, I can't remember, in Africa, and someone like quietly pulled me aside. It was something in Rwanda, and he kind of said, I wouldn't say that again. I was like, what does it mean? He goes, nothing good. So